Picture this. A dog gets kicked by its owner. Hard. The kind of kick that would make you never trust that person again. And yet 20 minutes later, that same dog is back, tail wagging, leaning against the exact same person's leg like nothing happened. Now flip it. An elephant spends 30 years in chains, beaten, starved, forced to give rides to tourists every single day of its life. Then one day it's rescued. And instead of attacking every human it sees for the rest of its life, which, let's be honest, it would have every right to do, it slowly, carefully, lets a brand new human walk up and touch its trunk. So what is actually happening here? Are animals just forgetting? Are they too dumb to hold a grudge? Or is something way deeper going on? Something that scientists have only just started to understand? This is the story of whether animals can forgive us. And the answer is way weirder and way more beautiful than you think. Let's start with the biggest myth we need to bust immediately. Animals are not robots that reset to factory settings after something bad happens. That's not what's going on. For decades, scientists actually avoided this topic completely because they were terrified of sounding ridiculous. Nobody wanted to be the researcher who said the monkey forgave the other monkey and get laughed out of the science conference. But then a Dutch scientist named Frans de Waal did something nobody expected. He just watched. He sat and observed chimpanzees for years, and he noticed something that broke the rules science had set for itself. After chimpanzees fought, really fought, biting, screaming, full chaos, they didn't just walk away and avoid each other forever. Within minutes, sometimes seconds, they'd come back together. They'd hug, they'd kiss, one would reach out a hand, and the other would take it. Scientists have now recorded this exact pattern, this coming back together after a fight, in over 400 separate studies. Not just in chimps, in dogs, wolves, horses, hyenas, dolphins, and at least 17 different species of primates. That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence repeating itself 400 times. That's a pattern. And patterns in science mean something real is happening. Here's the part that should blow your mind a little. Researchers call this behavior reconciliation, because for a long time they were too cautious to call it what it actually looks like. But de Waal eventually just said it straight. He said this behavior has to involve the animal shifting its own emotions on purpose, turning some kind of internal switch from angry back to calm in order to physically go back and touch the individual that just heard it. And he said that process, that internal switching, is basically the same machinery that forgiveness runs on in humans. We're not talking about a cute metaphor here. We're talking about an actual described scientific mechanism. So why would evolution even build this into an animal's brain? Why would a wolf, an animal built to survive in one of the harshest environments on the planet, evolve the ability to make peace with something that just heard it? The answer comes down to one brutal fact about survival. Being alone gets you killed. If you are a wolf and you get into a fight with another wolf in your pack and you just never speak to it again, that's not tough. That's a death sentence. Wolves hunt in packs because a lone wolf can't take down an elk by itself. A lone wolf freezes faster in winter. A lone wolf has no one watching its back. So when researchers studied wolf packs, they found something incredible. Wolves reconcile after fights even more reliably than domestic dogs do. Dogs, the ones living cozy lives on your couch, are actually worse at making up after conflict than wild wolves are. Why? Because a dog on your couch doesn't need its pack to literally survive tomorrow. A wild wolf does. The relationship is worth too much to throw away over one bad moment. That single fact tells you everything about why forgiveness might exist at all, in any species, including us. It's not weakness, it's strategy. It's the ultimate long game. Now let's zoom into the story that made headlines around the world and go deep into what was actually happening scientifically. Elephants. If you want to understand animal trauma and animal healing at the most extreme level, elephants are where the story gets real. Elephants used in logging camps, circuses, and tourist rides across parts of Asia have, for decades, been trained using a method that involves pain, isolation, and fear starting from when they are babies. Ripped from their mothers, chained, beaten, until they submit. This isn't a rumor. This is documented reality that sanctuary workers deal with every single day. So here's the question. After 30 years of that, when one of these elephants finally gets rescued and brought to an actual sanctuary, what happens? You'd expect permanent damage. And in some ways, there is. Elephants that arrive at sanctuaries often show behavior that trauma researchers describe using language borrowed directly from human psychology, flinching at sudden sounds, panicking during thunderstorms, refusing to be touched for months. One elephant named Lady, rescued and given years of safety, still tenses up and looks like she thinks she's in trouble if a caretaker approaches too fast, even though nothing bad has happened to her in years. That's real. That doesn't just disappear. But here's the part that gets genuinely remarkable. Sanctuary workers use something called protected contact, which basically means the elephant is never forced into anything. The elephant chooses when to approach. The human waits. No chains, no punishment, no demands. And over months, sometimes years, something shifts. Elephants that arrived unable to be touched by any human eventually walk up on their own and rest their trunk against a caretaker's shoulder. They choose it. Nobody makes them. And once that trust is rebuilt, it tends to stay. Caretakers at multiple sanctuaries have described formerly abused elephants who now approach new human visitors calmly, without the fear response they had when they first arrived. If an elephant were simply a machine wired to fear all humans permanently after abuse, this rebuilding would be impossible. It's not impossible. It happens over and over. At sanctuaries on different continents, with elephants who have never met each other and share nothing except a similar history of pain. That consistency is the whole story right there. Let's talk about why this matters biologically, because there's an actual chemical explanation, and it's honestly one of the coolest things in this entire video. When any social mammal, that includes elephants, dogs, wolves, dolphins, and humans, experiences a positive bonding moment, gentle touch, a calm voice, safety. After fear, the brain releases a hormone called oxytocin. You've probably heard of it as the love hormone, which is a little bit of an oversimplification, but the core idea is right. Oxytocin is the chemical your brain uses to say, this is safe, this connection is good, do this again. It's the same hormone that floods a mother's brain when she bonds with a newborn. It's the same hormone that spikes in your brain when you pet a dog you trust. And critically, research on dogs has shown that oxytocin levels rise in both the dog and the human during a positive interaction, at the same time, in sync. That means trust and forgiveness aren't just abstract feelings animals might or might not have. They are backed by an actual measurable chemical process, happening in real time, in a real brain, that can be tracked in a lab. This isn't guesswork, this is blood work. So think about what that means for the elephant story. Every single gentle interaction, every calm approach, every moment where a human proves they are not a threat is potentially triggering that same oxytocin system that got damaged by years of abuse. It's like the brain slowly rebuilding a bridge that got blown up, one small plank at a time. It's not instant, it's not guaranteed, but it is biologically real, and it's happening inside the skull of every animal that goes through this process. Okay, now here's where we need to get real about something important, because this video would be dishonest if we skipped it. Forgiveness in animals is not the same thing as forgetting. This is a massive distinction, and it's the key to understanding literally everything else in this video. When an elephant learns to trust a new caretaker, it isn't because the memory of the abuse magically vanished. The elephant hasn't forgotten. What's actually happening is closer to what happens in trauma recovery in humans. The old fear doesn't get deleted, it gets replaced with new evidence. The brain essentially runs a constant background calculation. Is this situation like the one that hurt me? Or is it different? Every calm, safe interaction adds a little bit of new evidence to the "this is different" side of the scale. Enough evidence, over enough time, and the behavior shifts. Even though the original memory of harm is still sitting right there in the brain the entire time. This is actually why some animals only trust specific individual humans and stay permanently wary of humans in general. A dog that was abused by a man with a certain build or voice might trust its new female owner completely within weeks, but flinch every single time a random man raises his voice nearby for the rest of its life. That's not the dog being irrational. That's the dog being an incredibly precise pattern detection machine, which is exactly what evolution built it to be. It's not blanket forgiveness of humans as a category. It's targeted trust, rebuilt with a specific individual based on specific repeated evidence. Let's bring in a wild story that shows this same principle from a completely different angle. There's a documented account from Alaska of a man who years earlier had freed a wolf that was caught in a trap, an animal in serious pain, terrified, and completely at his mercy. He could have walked away. He didn't. He helped it. Years later, that same man was out in the wilderness and found himself face to face with a bear, a genuinely life-threatening situation, and a wolf intervened. Reports describe it as the very same wolf he had helped years before, stepping in during the confrontation. Now, Wild animal stories like this always deserve a healthy amount of skepticism. Wolves are wild animals, not loyal pets, and we should never assume a wolf is thinking in the same narrative terms we are. But here's what's scientifically interesting regardless of the exact details. Countless documented cases across different species show animals responding differently, specifically and consistently to humans who previously helped them versus humans who previously harmed them. That pattern, recognizing an individual and responding based on past experience with that individual, is well documented in species with strong memories, including elephants, dolphins, corvids like crows and ravens, and yes, wolves. Crows in particular have been studied extensively for this. Researchers at the University of Washington did an experiment where they wore specific masks while trapping crows, an unpleasant experience for the birds. Years later, crows would specifically scold and mob anyone wearing that exact mask, while completely ignoring people wearing different masks standing right next to them. The crows weren't just scared of humans generally. They remembered the specific face associated with harm for years and passed that memory down to crows who weren't even alive during the original event. That's not vague grudge holding. That's a precise, targeted, generational memory system. Which brings us to an important twist in this whole conversation. If animals can hold on to specific memories of harm that precisely and for that long, doesn't that make the elephant sanctuary story even more remarkable? Because it means the animal isn't forgiving out of confusion or forgetfulness. It's making an active, ongoing choice to extend trust to a new individual despite having every biological reason to stay defensive. That's not a bug in the system. If anything, it might be one of the most sophisticated things a brain can do. Hold on to real pain as information while still being flexible enough to let new evidence in. Let's go back to dogs for a second, because your own pet is honestly running one of the most fascinating experiments in the entire animal kingdom every single day. Researchers at Butler University ran a study watching 177 dogs interact at a dog park over 8 months, specifically looking at what happens after fights. And they found the same reconciliation pattern chimpanzees show. After a scuffle, dogs would often approach each other again shortly after, engage in calm, friendly behavior, essentially the doggy equivalent of a handshake, and go right back to playing like nothing happened. Behaviorists have also documented dogs that bite their own owners, sometimes out of fear or pain, then immediately display what looks like guilt or apology, lowered body posture, avoiding eye contact, leaning in for reassurance. Whether that's a fully conscious, "I'm sorry, please forgive me," the way a human would mean it, science genuinely can't say for certain yet. But the behavioral pattern is unmistakably there, and it maps almost perfectly onto reconciliation behavior seen across dozens of other species. Now here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Why does this even matter? Why should you care whether a chimp or an elephant or your dog can technically forgive in a way that counts scientifically? Here's why. Because for most of history, humans assumed animals were simple, instinct machines. Stimulus in, reaction out. Nothing going on emotionally behind the eyes. That assumption is exactly what allowed industries to justify treating animals in ways we now recognize as genuinely cruel, logging camps that chain baby elephants, testing labs that assumed animals felt nothing, roadside zoos that assumed a gorilla locked in a small enclosure had no inner emotional life worth considering. Every single piece of research we've talked about in this video chips away at that old assumption. If an elephant can experience something recognizable as trauma, and can also experience something recognizable as healing and renewed trust, then that elephant has a rich enough inner emotional world that how we treat it actually matters. Morally, not just practically. This connects to one of the most famous moments in the history of animal science. And it has nothing to do with forgiveness directly, but it completely changed how seriously researchers took animal emotion. In 1996, at a zoo in Chicago, a 3-year-old boy fell 18 feet into a gorilla enclosure and was knocked unconscious. Everyone watching assumed the worst. Instead, a female gorilla named Binti Jua walked over, gently picked the injured child up, cradled him protectively, and carried him to the enclosure door where zoo staff could reach him, shielding him the entire way from the other gorillas. Nobody trained her to do that. Nobody could have trained her to do that. That single moment forced an entire generation of scientists to publicly reconsider what was actually happening inside the mind of a great ape. If a gorilla is capable of that level of protective, empathetic behavior toward a species that isn't even her own, the idea that animals can't process complex emotional states like trust, care, or forgiveness starts to look less like caution and more like flat-out denial. So let's zoom all the way back out and answer the actual question from the title. Can animals forgive humans after being hurt? Based on everything science currently understands, here's the honest, no exaggeration answer. Animals don't forgive the way you see in a movie, where a character has one dramatic realization and every bad memory disappears in a single scene. That's not how it works for humans either, if we're being honest. What animals do instead is something arguably more impressive. They keep the memory, the fear response doesn't get erased, but their brains are wired biologically, chemically, with real hormones like oxytocin doing real measurable work to update that fear with new evidence over time. Enough safety, enough consistency, enough proof that this particular human is different from the one who caused the pain, and the behavior shifts. The trust rebuilds, sometimes fully, sometimes only partially, with lingering flinches at thunderstorms or raised voices for the rest of that animal's life. That's not animals being simple or forgetful, that's animals running the exact same emotional operating system that forgiveness runs on in us, just without the words to explain it. And maybe that's the most important takeaway from this whole video. The elephant that finally lets a new caretaker touch its trunk after 30 years of pain isn't being naive. It's not stupid, and it hasn't forgotten a single thing that happened to it. It's making one of the bravest calculations a living creature can make, deciding, based on real evidence, that this one might be different, that the next hand reaching toward it might actually be safe. Every single time an abused animal lets a human back in, it's not weakness. It's the single strongest form of hope that biology knows how to produce. And honestly, that might be one of the most human things about them.